Okay. Well, I just want to say to everybody that I wish I could be there. First of all, thanks, Alexis, for inviting me, and I really wish I could be there, but I'm home taking care of my husband. Sometimes it is family first, even over mycology. But I just want to say hi to all the folks I know down there. Andy, Ed and Ikuko, Lee and Linnea, Vera, Roy and Barbara. I don't know, Ellen, Mark, I don't know who's left down there. So just hi to everybody. Um, okay, so you guys are waiting for the morels. We're waiting for the morels, but I'm going to talk about some mushrooms that don't happen till August. So you have time to sit back and think about if you want to go up to these high elevations and check out some of the alpine mushrooms of North America. And I call it treasures above tree line. This is up on Niwot Ridge. And and let's just, you can just think of this as a walk through the Alpine this evening. Just nice and cool and walking around in these beautiful habitats. And when I talk about Alpine, I'm talking about actually above tree line. Some people use the word Alpine just to mean mountainous, but I'm using it in the strict sense, meaning above tree line. So when we go up to collect, we're collecting above that dotted line. And then in the foreground, that's kind of coming uphill in front of us, that's just at the borderline of alpine and then tree line. And so that's the collecting area for alpine. This is up on Loveland Pass. How come? Why go up there? Why make the effort and go up to the up? Well, I found out, first of all, when I started this project almost 30 years ago, that basically above tree line was an unexplored habitat. They really haven't had any, just a few stray collections from up there. I think Joe Amorati and Meinhard Moser made a few trips through there, but that was about it. So it really, the whole Rocky Mountain Alpine was basically unstudied. And it turns out there's a lot of really unique mushrooms up there. And I include it as urgent just because of the rising tree line, of course, and the warming climate change. So this is up on my part of the territory. This is the Beartooth Plateau. So here's how I got hooked on this. This was a NAMA foray, Copper Mountain, way back in 1997. Maybe some of you were around and you remember that foray. I think it was Judy Rogers, maybe, that picked this up. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, here's this little spoon-shaped mushroom called Arhenia oroscalpium, 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters. And just look at your little finger and think about how big 4 millimeters is. They're tiny little guys, little spoon shape, no real gills. They just have veins and a stem stuck over on one side. So this absolutely fascinated me from the foray. It fascinated me for the shape of it because it's unusual, but it also fascinated me and later on because here it was down in Colorado, and there was actually one day when we were collecting in Colorado, and a few days later, I was in Greenland, and we no sooner landed at the airport in Kangerlussuaq, and right almost off the runway, there was Arhenia oroscalpium again at sea level. In Colorado, it was up at 12,000 feet. So you go all this distance, and there it is again. And then it wasn't until years later, I found it again, closer to sea level, in Alaska. So this distribution is really unusual. And as I go through the talk, at the end, I'll explain why we have this unusual distribution. And I might mention some of these other places. Iceland is here, Greenland, Svalbard, there's an arrow at the top. That's a island not far from the North Pole, 500 miles or so. So all these places that I've visited, you find these same mushrooms a lot of them that you find down here in southern Colorado, which I find really remarkable. So, there's lots of books on alpine wildflowers, and the Denver Botanic Garden has them for sale. Alpine wildflowers of Mount Rainier, tundra wildflowers. Everyone knows that those alpine wildflowers are special and different, but not so much the mushrooms. So, until now. So, part of this talk is tooting my own horn a little bit, just to um, let you know that last year we published the Alpine Mushrooms of North America. It's just a very small field guide, easy to carry up into the Alpine. If you're not seriously collecting, you can just use it for identifying while you're up there because it's not a big tome, it's just a little book. So now there is something for above tree line in North America. And I consider it kind of a record of what we found over the years for conservation as a baseline data and for education. And I'm hoping it promotes interest so we get some young, fit mycologists ready to tackle those alpine mushrooms because the alpine of the Rocky Mountains is a big territory and we certainly did not cover it all. So how come? I mean, how come nobody went up there? How come people did not collect in the Alpine? This beautiful with all these alpine wildflowers on a summer day, little bits of snow patches, nice and cool when it's warm down below. Well, it turns out in Europe, there's a whole history of alpine mycology. And in places like Svalbard and Greenland, there's a history of Arctic mycology. But we did not have that in North America. There were some collections, like I said, but we did not have that history. Well, maybe I could surmise this is about the end of July, the beginning of August. So you can see you're headed up to the high elevations. Sometimes it's a difficult access. You have to hike quite a ways to get up there, sometimes not. And you have to be in shape because there's less oxygen. There can be snow any time of year. And if there's a little bit of snow, it can stimulate the mushrooms if it melts off. And then the next day it could be really good. But, while the snow's there, you can't find the mushrooms. We've been up there and when big lightning storms have come through and there's no place to hide, so you're hightailing it back down after hiking up, and of course lots of bugs. So you have to be prepared to be up there, but there are some beautiful days up there. I think the biggest thing is to talk about the short season. August, that's about it. Maybe the end of July a little bit and maybe a little past August, but only the month of August is it really worth it to look for mushrooms up high. But here's some of the other kind of, I don't know if I want to call it problems, but maybe reasons a lot of people didn't go up there is because the mushrooms are tiny. They're little. They're right in that mat. There's a whole mat of vegetation there. This is in Greenland. I think this is Grow Gulden and Marika Nauta, looking for little tiny mushrooms in these mats. So maybe a lot of people aren't interested. And of course, we didn't have the literature here for identifying them. I call them belly mushrooms. This is my husband here. Belly mushrooms because the alpine botanists go up and look at those tiny little alpine plants and they use their magnifiers and they get down on their bellies and they magnify the plants because they don't want to pick them. Well, it's the same idea with some of these mushrooms. You get down on your belly in order to see them. This is a whole mat of willows, dwarf willows. That's the host. These are mycorrhizal mushrooms. I'll say more about that later. But these are basically the miniature forests with the mushrooms, um, their mycorrhizal partners in there. But on the other hand, there's minimal collecting gear. You're not taking big totes and bags and baskets or anything like that into the Alpine. Just a few little tackle boxes is about all you need. And this is egg on horak here. We're sniffing mushrooms. They're so tiny, you have to right away do a sniff test to see what they smell like right away, do a taste and spit, because they're just such ephemeral things. So they're a little bit challenging. And here's just some of the Alpine above tree line. I just happen to have this map for the continental US with my apologies to Canada and Alaska. Um, but the reason I liked it is because it has a lot of the Colorado Alpine here. And our collecting sites, a lot of them were, the Swatch Range, Front Range, we're down into the San Juans. And then my territory up here is the Beartooth Plateau in Montana, Wyoming. It's up near Yellowstone Park. So that's where a lot of these collections have come from. But then we've also collected in other areas of the world and the country and Alaska, etc. When you go up to the Alpine, it's kind of a mosaic and you learn to read it like a map. You need to read, oh, these are meadows. I'm looking for meadow mushrooms. Here's some mosses down here in the water. I'm looking for moss mushrooms. Rocky slopes, dryas, that's a mycorrhizal plant. Willows, mycorrhizal, that's where you'll find your mycorrhizal mushrooms. So you'll learn to read that habitat. And that's how the book is laid out with ecological groups, mushrooms in meadows and grasslands, puffballs in meadows and grasslands, mushrooms on mosses, liverworts, soil, and soil would be that little arhenia, and mycorrhizal mushrooms with willow and birch. So the book is divided into those. So that's what I'm just going to go through and give you some examples from each of those. So let's start in the alpine meadows and grasslands. They're open. This is up on Niwot Ridge. I wish I could say my shoe is in there for size, but that was not intentional. This is Melanoleuca cognata up on Niwot Ridge. So let's look at the mushrooms in the alpine meadows and grasslands. We've actually found some morels up there in the high elevations, 12,000 feet. The highest was in Colorado, and I'm not going to say exactly where, but yeah, 12,000 feet. And then we also found it on the Beartooth Plateau in Montana. And it has been sequenced, and it's Morchella norvegiensis. This is a bit of a surprise, but in Europe, it's a subalpine morel. And these are in kind of the low alpine, although 12,000 feet is kind of getting up there. My husband accused me of planting it. And I thought, well, where am I going to get a morel to plant it up here? But it also goes down in below tree line. So some of the high elevation black morels could be this Morchella norvegiensis as well. We use them for conservation. We were going to eat a few, but we did not. We were good. And I know that you down in Colorado are interested in agaricus. You have quite a few interesting species down there. Um, I'm just going to show you a couple. They're not true alpine, but we do find them up high. Agaricus altipes. For those of you just learning your mushrooms, brown spores, free gills. And this species has a really copious veil, and the cap is kind of streaky as it gets older. Fibrillose streaky. So that's a little bit unusual for a high elevation agaricus. And these were identified molecularly and with Rick Kerrigan's help. And then the second one that we have, Agaricus cyanodermis. Um, I think a lot of you guys from Colorado know these from the high elevation forests and not necessarily the Alpine, but we find them up high in the Alpine. And this one, it looks like a kind of a robust meadow mushroom, Agaricus campestris, but it's scaly when it's young, and then it kind of gets blocky as it's older. No staining, um, but it has a pretty floccose ring. It's a little bit different than that meadow mushroom. So these are high elevations, but also up into the alpine. Now this one, Lepiota fabrii, is a true Arctic alpine mushroom. And whenever I put a yellow star here, um, that yellow star means that it's mostly Arctic and alpine. Lepiota fabrii was named for Jules Favre. Jules Favre was the father of Alpine mycology. He was a Swiss mycologist, used to hike up into the Alpine after work and collect the Alpine mushrooms, bring them down, and he wrote a wonderful guide way back in the 1950s for Europe, where they have that long history. Well, here it is over in North America on the top of the Rocky Mountains. Lepiota fabrii, white spores, free gills. It's distinctive because it has this sort of pinkish cast when it's young and the scales are all together. And then, like all the lepiotas, when the cap opens, the scales spread out and it's a little bit more of a buff color. And like other lepiotas, it has a ring, scaly stem below, but no vulva. So, not Amanita and white spores. So this is up on the Beartooth Plateau, and I was really excited to see this guy. And this is actually a photo from Alaska. This is Cystoderma adnatifolia, white spores, as opposed to that Lepiota. It has attached gills for you just guys learning your mushrooms here. And instead of being scaly, it's sort of branny or granular, just like bran flakes. So it's a little bit different texture, even though the color was similar to that Lepiota fabrii. This one we found in Alaska, Canada, Greenland, just to name a few places. And I want to draw your attention to this willow. This is not mycorrhizal, but this willow here, these round leaves that are reticulated, is a Salix reticulata, and that's a dwarf willow. It's just really shows the reticulated leaves here. And Clitosobe festivoides is another Arctic alpine mushroom that we found in our Rocky Mountains. This one, I believe, this is Colorado. This is high elevation Colorado, also known from Iceland, Norway, Svalbard, up near the North Pole. There are not a lot of Clitosobes in the Alpine. If there's a big dense cluster, they're in clusters, kind of caramel colored cap, and then it fades. Decurrent gills, white spores, just like a typical Clitosobe. But it's that clustering that you can really recognize it by. Oh, and this beautiful little guy, um, Lichen Omphalia alpina. It's in the Hygropheraceae, but the reason it has this name is because it is basically a basidio-lichen. It's a regular mushroom that it makes on top of the ground, but below ground, it's actually attached to algae cells. And I remember Orson Miller showing me this under the microscope, and the mycelium, as it went down from the mushroom, was coiling, almost like a spiral, and in the middle of those coils were algae cells that were captured. And that's the photosynthetic organism that produces the carbons or sugars that feed the fungus. Um, Really interesting little organisms, these basidiolichens. So we have found this in our alpine in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Svalbard, in Europe, in the alpine in Europe. So if you sum this up and you just look at the mushrooms in the meadows and the grasslands, um, a lot of them are also found at high elevations below tree line. So they kind of traverse tree line, whether they're above or below. And some of them are restricted to Arctic and alpine habitats. I put those in bold in this list. This is some of the species that we found. And the ones in bold are the true Arctic and alpine. So there's not that many. A lot of these can be found a little bit lower down. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay, now if we look at puffballs in the grasslands, a little bit of terminology for those of you just learning. The outside exoperidium, some of them have a endoperidium inside, a gleba with spores inside, and some have a base. So no gills, the spores are just a powdery mass inside. So I have a section in the book on some of the puffballs in the alpine. I debated if I wanted to put this in. This is definitely not a true alpine puffball, but we do find it in the Alpine, rarely, more in Montana. I don't know if you ever find it that high up in Colorado. We did not, but in Montana, it is up in the Alpine. Calvatia buniana, the giant western puffball, can be a foot and a half across. So it's rare, but it does occur. The Europeans that came over went crazy about it because they had never seen anything like it. They don't have it over there. And the contrast is this little Bovista limosa, little tiny guy, just a half inch wide or high. It's got a little pore, and like a Bovista, the outer exoperidium comes off, and you have an endoperidium. But this is restricted to Arctic and Alpine. It's been given a lot of other names. I think people would call it Pusillum or some other names, but if it's in above tree line, it's probably limosa. And then some of the medium puffballs that we have here, um, frigidum and cretaceum uh, and turneri all have the yellow star. These are all Arctic alpine puffballs. Frigidum has a base, it's more pear-shaped. Um, the other two are not pear-shaped without a base, and then Cretaceum has a thick skin, and Turneri has a thin skin, kind of a fine line there. A lot of these you have to get down to the microscopic level sometimes to look at the spores to see what you have. I have a great big book on puffballs from Europe, and a lot of them are Arctic alpine puffballs. And it was very interesting that you had to get down to the microscopic level and looking at the spores to figure some of these out. But three of them have circumpolar distributions. And now, when you look at the puffball section for some of the ones that we found, you see a few of them are Arctic alpine, but not maybe less than half of those. Okay, so third group, some small mushrooms on mosses, liverworts, and open soil. So some of the habitats in the alpine, you can look for specific moss types or specific moss habitats if that's the kind of mushrooms that you're interested in. And you get away from the dwarf willows and the dryas and all the mycorrhizal plants, and you're looking at now mushrooms on moss. These can be tough in the sense that they're tiny little guys, little LBMs for sure. But I tried to, in the book, keep it as morphological as I could. And the features to look for with the little guys are, first of all, is the stem attached to the side of the cap, or is it attached in the center? That's usually easy to figure out. And if it's attached in the center, is it bell-shaped or funnel-shaped? That can be a fine line. The one little Arhenia in front here would be considered funnel-shaped and not bell-shaped. It's really nice if you can figure out if the spores are dark or light, but on a lot of these little alpine mushrooms, getting a spore print is a little bit tricky. I'll put a piece of white paper down in the tackle box and put the mushroom down on it and maybe some moss on top, and maybe I'll get a spore print by the time I get back. Or you can always use the microscope. So some of the mushrooms that we found that had are the stem attached to one side is one of my favorites, Arhenia oroscalpium, which is another basidio-lichen. And that appears to be almost always in the Arctic and Alpine. There are some exceptions. I think Scott Redhead found it in some odd places, but it has that stem attached to the side and it has veins. Now, if you look at the Arhenia right next to it, this is a little guy that I found in an animal hole up in the Alpine, and I reached down in, I could see something growing by the side and pulled it out. And it has true gills. They're not veins. Instead of just the veins for the oroscalpium, here are the true gills. That's a distinctive characteristic. It's near leucotricha, but we're working on that one. And then this third one, bottom left, Arhenia lobata. Uh, it is a no stem and vein-like gills, so it doesn't have a distinct stem. This one is not starred because this is also found at high elevations in the forest, along streams and the moss, so it's not strictly Arctic alpine. So if you look at this little guy with the question mark, you see it kind of goes in, it looks like it has a little stem, but if you're just thinking about it, that's not enough of a distinct stem. So this is Arhenia lobata here. The stem is not distinct enough to make it oroscalpium. Some other little mushrooms on moss. We have some dark Arhenias. Velutipes is the most common one. Dark blackish brown. It's striate with that blackish. It gets darker or lighter depending on moisture. Velutipes means velvet stem. It doesn't look like it has much of a velvet stem. These are really, really tiny. But if you look under the microscope at the stem, you can see the hairs. They're just mushed down, maybe because of the weather or whatever. But under the microscope, they're pretty clear that you can see it does have a hairy stem. And the other common one we find is Omphalina rivulicola. And this is a true Omphalina. It's not a basidio-lichen. And this one is in moss. It looks like a clitosobe because it's a little bit larger than your typical Omphalina. It's a pale brown. It's definitely divoted in the center. It has decurrent gills and white spores like a clitosobe. It's pretty fragile, though, and the stem is rather fragile. So Omphalina rivulicola. And then here's a couple little guys. These are in the category of, okay, now stem central, funnel shaped, decurrent gills, and bright colors, in this case, orange. And so if I asked you, what's the main difference between these, and you're looking at these, and maybe you're trying to count gills, maybe you're looking at a general shape or the stem, but you might want to step back and look. The one on the left, Lorelia marcantii, is on liverworts. It's the substrate. Rickenella fibrilla is in moss. So sometimes you have to really pay attention when you're picking. It's going to help you identify these and not just grab them and put them in your container. Lorelei, of course, was named for Norvell, and Marcantii is for the Marcantia, for the liverwort. And uh, the association, in my mind, is a little up for question as to exactly what's going on here. There may be more information out there than I have. And Rickenella fibula on mosses. Again, orange, decurrent gills, long stem. Rickenella is a pretty tough little mushroom. You can give it a boink test. You can just flick your finger at it, and the stem is kind of rubbery. It gives you a clue that it's not a fragile mushroom. It doesn't just fall apart. And it has cystidia on the cap. So these, while they're Arctic alpine for Lorelia marcantii, not so much for Rickenella. That can be found at lower elevations. And then the other category for mushrooms with the stem in the center would be having a bell-shaped cap instead of a funnel-shaped cap. In this case, the gills might be attached to free. It doesn't matter so much. You're just looking at the bell-shaped cap. And a lot of these are in moss. Gallerinas, uh, the typical Gallerina is kind of a buff to brown or orangey brown color. We have about 5 species, but there are a lot of species in Arctic alpine habitats, and I'm not going to go through those today. We also have just a couple Mycenas. Um, Now, the Gallerinas will have the brown spores, Mycenas, white spores. We have Citrinomarginata and another one, but we did not find a lot of Mycenas, whereas in the Alps in Europe and in the Arctic, there are a lot of Mycenas in these cold habitats. We just were not finding them. Bell-shaped. And this one, maybe not quite so bell-shaped, but this is a very well-known, iconic Arctic alpine mushroom. Um, it's a Rhizomarasmius epidryas. Um, it has I'm going to call it a bell-shaped cap with pleats and a black velvety stem. And it's always found in Dryas, and it's found on the dead parts of Dryas. It's probably doing a little bit of decomposition. The first time I saw this fungus, we were up in Banff or Jasper with Orson Miller, and he was taking his class up there in his van, and then we had a whole caravan behind. And all of a sudden, Orson stops the van right in the middle of the road. It's a small road. Van doors open. He runs out and he's yelling, Dryas, 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 because that's what he was familiar with in Alaska. And it's just an indicator of cold habitats. And he was so excited to see it. And then here was this little mushroom there, Epidryas, on Dryas. And so that's how I learned Rhizomarasmius epidryas on that little field trip. And it has a circumpolar distribution around the pole, but it's also found in Colorado. If you find this little guy, it's special. We did not find it that often, maybe in a couple places. Okay, so if you look at these mosses or mushrooms on mosses and liverworts, you have a few in bold that are Arctic alpine, more or less, and then not maybe about half and half for those. And if you do a summary on some of that, if you think about it, meadows traverse tree line. I mean, they do not depend on trees or woody plants. So they can be up into the alpine, and if the meadow goes below tree line, they can be there as well. They are not tied except to their moss substrates or grass substrates, but the meadows are traversing the tree line, and so are the mushrooms where we were in our Rocky Mountains. But it's a different story when you get to the mycorrhizal mushrooms here. And these mycorrhizal mushrooms, you'd think, gosh, mycorrhizal mushrooms, you find those in the forest with trees, right? But there are no trees above tree line in the Alpine. But there are woody plants. There are the dwarf willows, a few inches high. You see those on the left. And then shrub willows can be maybe a few inches high, 6 inches high to a few feet high. And that's on the right. And then down lower here, you can see Salix reticulata with the round reticulated leaves, Salix arctica. Those are the two most common ones we have. And then Salix planifolia with the red wood is a shrub willow. And also Salix glauca is another common one. So these are some of the mycorrhizal hosts. Also Dryas in the rose family is a mycorrhizal host. Birch, when you can find it. Betula is a mycorrhizal host. Sometimes, rarely alders if you get up into Alaska. And again, it's a mosaic. So you learn to read the habitat. Where are the dwarf willows? Where are the shrub willows? Where's the dryas? Sometimes binoculars help, and you can kind of zoom in and see where you want to go to see where those hosts are. It's a big habitat. You have to parse it out so you can find what you're looking for. And of course, mycorrhizal fungi benefit plants. In this case, notice the little tiny dwarf willow here. And that little tiny dwarf willow is through photosynthesis producing carbon or sugars that feed itself and the fungus. And then the mycelium of the fungus is picking up mostly nitrogen and fertilizing the plant. Well, it might look just like a tiny dwarf willow, a couple inches high, but they make big mats. They're wide, feet wide. So the plant is just low and flat, but there's still a lot of host there. So we found that we were excited to find this one, Amanita nivalis, the famous snow mushroom. It can be gray or it can turn white. And it's well known from a lot of Arctic alpine habitats. That one little picture, I think, is from Norway. But the other two are from our Rocky Mountains. And notice the host. These are the miniature alpine forests again. Reversal. The mushrooms are the tall part of the system of this partnership. And then this is also Amanita nivalis below. It can be kind of a silvery gray, just like Amanita vaginata. I know Vera says Amanita. I say Amanita. Anyway, these two little Amanitas were buttons when they were young. That whole vulva, Amanitas have a vulva. These do not have rings. That vulva covers the whole mushroom when it's young and makes a button. When it breaks, it leaves those patches. These were two little buttons when I picked them, and I put them in a little terrarium with soil. I watched Orson Miller do this. And amanitas, for whatever reason, use that stored moisture and they will just keep sprouting. So in the morning, I had these two little guys open, and the gills, you can't tell here, but they were a brilliant pink when they were fresh. And the other most common amanita we find is Greenlandica. Uh, and this one is more of a brown color. Again, of course, free gills, white spores, and it has kind of a raggedy sac-shaped vulva, no ring, white patches, and I call it an adder pattern, ADDER, like a snake adder pattern on the stipe. There are not very many amanitas that we've found in the Rocky Mountains. Amanita nivalis, the white gray one, we found more in Colorado. This one, Amanita greenlandica, we found in Montana and Wyoming and Alaska, but we have not found it in Colorado. So if you find it, take a picture, let me know. And it should be with willows, of course. But it's also known from Greenland, of course, and Canada. And here's just a picture of it. This is one day when we were collecting in Alaska, and we had the benefit of a helicopter. As you get older, these things really count. You don't have to. The last time we went up to this place, it was I don't know, a 5 hour hike in. You collect and then you've got to hike down. But this time we had the benefit of the helicopter. Let me see if this plays. That's my former graduate student, Kate Mohat, who's in Alaska as an ecologist. But you can see the habitat. It looks like there's nothing up there, but there were mushrooms all over the place. You just had to look for them. Okay, so here we have russula next. Let's look at some mycorrhizal russulas up in the Alpine. And this is Chance Knopfsinger. He now has my position at Montana State University, but this is back when he was a graduate student. He did his work on the russulas. The russulas are tiny. We call them nanoforms. Here it's compared to a penny, the size of a penny. Um, on this, you have to have the odor. You just do that right away. Sniff it, taste and spit for the russulas, and spore color. And you can go a long way with that and cap color, which is kind of changeable. But if you get the odor and the taste and the spore color, you're doing pretty good. And let me show you a few of the russulas that Chance found here. This is kind of a big one for the Alpine, Russula subrubans. Uh, Big mushroom, fishy odor. So it reminds you of Russula zamphuina, only it's more orange and mottled. It has yellow gills and yellow spores, and it's with willows. Now, interestingly, in Europe, this occurs not only in the Alps and the Alpine, but also in the subalpine. So it's quite possible that this has been overlooked or misidentified just below tree line in our alpine. A lot of times willows are overlooked as a host. You might see three big conifers there, but you forget the willow that's in the understory. So this is one to look for. It's also known from Europe, Rocky Mountains, Greenland. And this is a famous russula in the alpine world, Arctic world anyway. Russula nana, nana meaning small, and this is a little guy, quarter size maybe. It's radish hot, although it's hotter in the morning and it's not as hot in the afternoon. We tested this. Not much of an odor, white spores and white gills. And this is uh, true Arctic alpine mushroom, uh, circumpolar distribution. Bright cherry red cap that fades to white. Now I'm going to show you. This is a red mushroom, cherry red, fading to white. And we thought, well, there aren't too many red. Well, oh, I forgot. Let's throw this in. It's now famous in Wyoming in the Natural History Museum exhibit in Cody, Wyoming. Someone called me up. They said we have a alpine display and look at the fox and look at the back end of the fox, and there's a little red dot down there. That's Russula nana, and here it is. They made a little display with that, and I sent them a photograph. They have a little um, bit on what it does. And so now it's a famous alpine mushroom in Wyoming. Who knew? So we only thought we had a couple russulas and just a couple red russulas. We thought we had Russula nana, and we thought we had Russula lacata, which is more of a, that's the top right, more of a maroon color with a dark black center, but still white spores and white gills. Well, when Chance did his work and the molecular started doing its job, we sorted out a lot of different species of red russulas and other colored russulas. Interestingly, it got confusing for a while, but if you pay attention to spore color, is it white or yellow? And then the yellow dots on the pictures, they have a yellow spore color. Is it hot or is it not? And that red dot says it's hot. And then using one more character, does it have a pink blush on the stem? Now, sometimes it has to dry a little bit to get that pink blush, but if you have a dried mushroom, it'll certainly show up. And then we ended up with all these different species. Um, I'm not going to go through all these, but Russula lacata, we knew we had this maroon cap. We thought Russula saliciticola was the same, but Russula saliciticola is not hot and it has a pink blush on the stem. That was the difference. We didn't quite realize we had Russula purpurea fusca, but when we paid attention to the spore print was yellow. That delineated it. And then in the very middle, we had found a new species, Russula neopascua, and you notice a little fish there. It's fishy. So just like the big subrubans, it has that fishy odor, but it's a little tiny Russula. And then there are a couple others that with different colors, Russula leavis, white in the middle down there, looks like a white lactarius, and intermedia up there. The ones that are starred are the Arctic alpine ones. Okay, let's take a look at Lactarius. Um, the Lactarius from a typical forest, a lot of you guys know these, medium to large. There's a few small ones. Cap is funnel shaped, right? Gills are decurrent. You cut the gills, it exudes milk. Ah, you have a Lactarius. And Ed Barge, my former graduate student, Dr. Ed Barge, did the Lactarius work. The Alpine Lactarius, on the other hand, are tiny. There's the penny. There's 4 or 5 lactarii that you could fit on the head of that penny. The cap is not funnel shaped, it's almost flat. The gills are not clearly decurrent. A lot of times it's just too dry to get milk. So the first order of business is it a lactarius? Can you identify it as a lactarius? You get clues. It's a lot of these, you start to figure out that a lot of these have a little bit of a salmon colored gill up there or an odor of cocoa butter to go, yeah, that's a lactarius. Now, some of them are identifiable or easy. This little guy, Lactarius lanceolatus, to me, it's not funnel shaped, but it looks pretty lactarius-like. There's its host, Salix reticulata. This was first described by Orson Miller from Alaska. It's orange, has a white milk, mild taste, white spores. And here's another photo. It's one of the large species of Lactarius in the Alpine. We've found this primarily in Wyoming and Colorado. I mean, in Montana. I'm not sure if it gets as far south as Colorado or not. But if you find an orange lactarius above tree line with willows, it's a good chance that it's Lactarius lanceolatus. We have seen it in, yeah, I said Alaska as well. Now for the little guys, and these are little guys, just quarter size, penny size, smaller. Lactarius nanus, just a little guy, brown cap, salmon colored gills. Lactarius politomarginatus is a new species. It stains purple when you cut the gills, a lot like Lactarius uvidus, only it's a little tiny guy, brown cap, white margin, pallid marginatus. Lactarius salicis reticulata for the willow that it's found with. This has a circumpolar distribution, and we have found it in Montana now. Lactarius glyciosmus, there's a subalpine version that's much larger. We find Lactarius glyciosmus in the alpine, just little guys with bog birch. So low birch in Arctic and alpine places. This little Lactarius, it has a brown cap, but what and salmon color gills, but what strikes me is a coconut odor. Um, More like a copper tone, I guess you would say. You're familiar with a copper tone sunscreen. That's the alpine form. So little Lactarius, Lactarii. Okay. Moving on to entelomas, a lot of pink spored mushrooms in the Entelomataceae, not otherwise. Um, for the entelomas, the first order of business, just to recognize it's an enteloma. They can have pink gills and indicate they're going to have pink spores, but a lot of them might have white gills or other colored gills, and you can't tell. But they do have spores that are angular if you look under the microscope. Um, I'm calling this Entoloma alpicola. It's very common on the Beartooth Plateau and in Colorado. See it in mats of dwarf willow like this. Molecularly, it comes up in the Entoloma malagoides group. Well, if you blow this up, Entoloma alpicola is this larger, dark, horsey looking entoloma, where the malagoides is with different habitat below tree line, pale, different hosts, same molecular. So people are grouping them together, but I can't quite abide by that yet. So I'm calling it Entoloma alpicola, dark cap. And then here's just the other end of the spectrum, a little small entoloma. Here you can see the pink gills, and they would be pink spores and angular spores. This is entoloma near Orontia alpinus. Molecularly, it matches this species, which was just described from Fennoscandia, or you could say Scandinavia, and they did not think that it made it as far as the Rocky Mountains, but here it is. Only ours turned out to be just a little bit different, and they had another one that they hadn't published on that's a little bit different, but they match up. So we have these distributions across the Atlantic Ocean of these little tiny mushrooms. And there's a lot of dark spored mycorrhizal mushrooms in the Alpine, and these are my favorite, but I restrained myself. I'm just going to show you a few of these. We have hebelomas or Vera's hebelomas in deference to Vera. About 16 different species in the Alpine. You can recognize them. They're by white to buff caps. They're often kind of greasy caps, sometimes a little bit flat, but they have this distinctive odor of raw potatoes or radish. If you can nail down that odor, you can usually tell if you have a hebeloma, although a few of the Cortinarias smell like that. And then the second thing is counting or looking at a veil. Some of them have a cobwebby veil. If they don't have a cobwebby veil, like this one below, they might have liquid dots on the gills. So they either have a veil or the liquid dots. And then from there, we break it down into the key, because these are difficult, on number of gills. And you just count the gills. You can count a quarter, times it by 4, and then see if you can key it out. Cortinarius, oh my gosh, over 35 species, lots of them, more to come. We're just publishing another paper with more. Cortinarius, cap is usually drier than the Hebelomas, brown, orange, lavender colors. You can still get that raphanoid odor, that little bit of radishy odor, cobwebby veil. These have rusty spores. So you can see on the top, the band that it makes is a rusty color, and you can see it on the bottom one. The rusty colored spores, you know you have a Cortinarius. Um, we have the Alpine form of tabularius, Picea disjuncendus, just to mention a few, Fusco flexipes, um, lots of tiny, tedious telemonias. And Inocebi, my favorite genus, over 20 species and growing. You can call these fiber heads. Uh, Often the cap is more pointed, not always. They have a different odor. They might be spermatic or smell like green corn or have a spicy, pungent odor. So, odor on these can really help you sort them out. Um, the Cortinarius will have warded spores. Inocebi will either have smooth spores or nodulose, not warty, but nodules, big, uh, what do I want to say? Big nodules that come out, all brown spore print. Just to show you just a few. These are two well-known Alpine Cortinarius. They're in the group Mixaceum, or as Agon says, Mixopsium. Um, Cortinarius absarocensis, named for the Absaroka Mountains in my part of the country. Meinhard Moser named these when he came up. They're rather big. They can get as big as dinner plates. They're slimy as heck on the cap, pale caramel colored, and slimy on the stipe, slippery like soap. Cortinarius alpinus or Favreii, named for Jules Favre, is smaller. Here it's shown it's darker, can also be lighter, but they look quite similar. Absarocensis is with the shrub willows and Alpinus favreii with the dwarf willows. And we thought they were two different species, and now we're not so sure. Is it just one species that happens to be bigger with the willows and smaller with the dwarf willows? So molecular is sorting this out right now. And then one more Cortinarius. This is Saturninus, and it comes in big, dense clusters. This is a big one. When it's young, it has a hoary cap, kind of mauve colored gills. It has sort of a lavender flavor to it, and it's cortina, brown spores. But when it gets older, it can look like this. But it's still in those dense clusters. It's still one of the largest Cortinarius species in the Alpine. So that makes it identifiable. Some recent molecular work found that Cortinarius saturninus is morphologically incredibly variable. And we've been overlooking it in a lot of other habitats. And I just found one under aspen and cottonwood that's small, doesn't look at all like this, and it matches molecularly. So it may surprise us as to where this is going to turn up. But this one is circumpolar too. Um, with birch, we do find Lexinum rotundifolii. Birch is the only host where we see the lexinums. Um, and these scaly capped bolete types have this one has a pale cap, pale spores, um, pale scabers on the stem. It doesn't really stain. It looks like a lot like Lexinum holopus, which can be in somewhat similar habitats, only lower elevation. But we found this one on the only birch on the one plateau we were collecting on, and there was the Lexinum, and it matches molecularly to rotundifolii. And we just happened to find this Boletus edulis in the Alaska with Dryas, the whole field. Interestingly, Orson has a paper on this, and he found it in the exact same place and said, it's in Dryas in this area in Alaska. I found it, and my former graduate student, Kate Mohat, has also found it. I'm guessing in the same place. So Dryas picks up some of the lower elevation mushrooms and will hold them in the higher habitats. This is Alaska. Okay, and so summarizing the mycorrhizal mushrooms, now we have almost two-thirds of these, the ones that are with dwarf willow that are Arctic and Alpine. And I didn't make a list because there are just so many brown sport. But now most of these species have a Arctic Alpine circumpolar distribution. They follow their hosts. That little map down there, the North Pole is right in the middle of it, that white dot. That's a distribution of just one of the dwarf willows, Salix reticulata. It's also the distribution of a lot of these mycorrhizal mushrooms. They're following their hosts. These alpine plants, willows don't occur down below tree line, not usually. So they're following their host. Okay, so here's the final explanation of things. Um, about 75% of the 1,600 Arctic and alpine mushrooms that we know have a circumpolar distribution, meaning around the pole. And the explanation, and this was first given to me by Bill Weber, and many of you may remember Bill Weber. He was a Colorado botanist. Uh, I can't remember if he died at 90 or 100 if he made it, but he was quite a character. And Bill Weber, and here's his article on this, um, was interested in this phenomenon because there were plants in southern Colorado that are rare that are also found in Asia, same species, disjunct distribution, and how come? And so when I talked to him about this, and he took me to a wonderful place for collecting, he said, well, it's as plain as the nose on your face. Well, it wasn't until I kind of had an aha moment. But back in the tertiary, about 65 million years ago and forward, the continents had connections. This is Beringia. Asia and North America were connected by Beringia, and Greenland was close in there. And these were forests, tertiary forests. Well, when glaciation happened, everything got pushed south and it's wiping out that vegetation. But the plants and the fungi, which were pre-adapted to cold, they could handle it, survived in refugia like Beringia or ice-free corridors. And this is happening about 11,700 years ago with that glaciation, final glaciation. And then as the glaciers retreat, then you have those pre-adapt plants that could handle the cold left in the cold on the mountaintops, and they recolonized the Arctic. That's Bill Weber's hypothesis. And then if you want to read more about it, here's his paper down here. So now it's starting to make sense to me. So that's why you find Arhenia or Asclepium in southern Colorado and in Alaska and in Svalbard and Greenland because of the glaciers. And just finally, I'll mention a few threats. One of the main ones is called the greening of the Arctic, and it's shrub expansion into the Arctic. Shrubs meaning birch, willows, alders. What you're looking at on the left is the green areas around the pole, is the areas where the shrubs have moved more and more into the alpine. And here you can see more and more willows in the two photos. And I can't remember, well, you can see the timelines there, 1966 to 2009. So with warming temperatures, they're moving up. So as the shrubs move in, the mushrooms that can handle the change will move with them. Some will, some won't. The lichens and the mosses are probably going to lose on this. There's also permafrost and ice melting. You guys know about some of this, air pollution, oil exploration in the Arctic, mining in the Alpine. So some of what we've done, we're hoping it's a baseline for conservation, red listing. I saw that NOAA was proposing Arhenia oroscalpium for red listing, which I didn't know, which was kind of exciting. Thank you, NOAA. And then thank you to a lot of these folks here, Aegon and Almut, who came over to help me learn the alpine mushrooms. My graduate students, Todd Osmondson, worked on Laccaria, Ed Barge on Lactarius, Chance on Russell, and then Kate Mohat, who's now in Alaska. All my students, Henry Becker, I think you had speak with you, Hebeloma or Hebeloma, and Ellen Larson and Jukka Varas. Ellen's from Sweden, Jukka's from Finland. We do a lot of the inostomy work together. And then my husband, Don, who's right upstairs resting. And of course, our own Vera Evenson. So I'm just going to leave this last slide up with some resources. We did a while back do an Arctic biodiversity assessment. It's a great big book, big fat book, chapters on mammals and birds and all kinds of stuff. But if you Google Arctic biodiversity assessment and go chapter 10 fungi, then you can pick up just the chapter on fungi. A lot of it's on lichens. There's a new major Danish work coming out, 3,000 pages that'll be online for Arctic and Alpine regions. Chapter 1, the intro and on rust and smuts is already available online. Coming soon will be the chapters on mushrooms. We also have North American Fungi, Volume 5. We have a lot of articles in that. That's online. And now, Alpine Mushrooms of North America. So you have a start, and I'm hoping somebody expands that information. So just want to say thanks to everybody for inviting me, and hope sometime I can get back down to Colorado to see all my friends down there. So, and that's it for this evening. And I hope we have a host that's going to join us here. And I don't know if I should stop sharing. Well, I could leave this up.
Yeah, you could leave that up. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Cathy. Yes. Do we have questions? Any questions here in the room first? Okay, let me see.
Up there.
Hello. Yeah, come up here.
I'm going to flip a light on here.
Okay. Can't see. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. Go ahead. Come talk.
Sure.
So she can hear you.
Hey, Cathy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. I have a question. You've mentioned Iceland a few times. I happen to be going to Iceland in August, which I'm excited about.
In August.
Yeah, is the season the same? You talked about the Alpine season being generally August, and here in Colorado that means high elevation above tree line, above 12-ish thousand
Right.
feet. Iceland, the tree line is much lower. So does that mean the season's kind of the same? Is August
Yes.
a good time to be going to Iceland and
Yes.
looking
What
at that
what
lower
what
elevation?
what time of August are you going? Do you know?
First half, the first 2 weeks of
First half?
August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That should work. First half of August, you could take my little book, or you might be able to pick up something there. There are some European guides that might be over there, but yeah, a lot of the same mushrooms will be over there. Oh, I envy you. Yep.
Well,
Same
yeah, thank you.
season.
I'll definitely pick up your book and
All
take it with
right.
me. Thanks.
Yeah.
This work. Any other questions in the room? Yeah. Hey, you.
How's it going?
Where you been hiding?
Oh, I just got in. I was wondering why were the lichens and the mosses likely to quote unquote like lose out as a summary with some of the climate, like collapse and greening of the Arctic?
Yeah, we think that the shrubs um, are just going to basically outgrow them. Now, you have a lot of lichens on rocks, but we think that the shrubs are going to provide shade and outgrow them and be basically taller and faster growing. And then some of the small mushrooms and stuff, their habitat may be reduced. And some of the studies have kind of shown that too.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Is the lack of edibility at high levels a preservation mechanism, given the animals up there don't have a lot to eat?
Can you hear him, Kathy?
No, I couldn't
Come up
understand.
here. Sorry, their mic is dead. Just go ahead and talk.
Okay.
She'll hear you.
Yeah, you highlighted the lack of edibility at altitude. Is that a preservation mechanism? The animals up there don't have a lot to eat to begin with, so I'm wondering.
Oh,
But
I
the
meant
amanitas are poisonous, right? There.
right. And actually, when I said not low edibility, I meant humans.
Oh.
I was trying to say that anyone going up to the Alpine looking for edible mushrooms, uh, maybe you can find some puffballs, a few agaricus, but basically it's not a place to look for edible mushrooms for us, is what I should have clarified that. So you don't take a big basket up there expecting to find dinner, unless you find a giant
Mhm.
puffball.
But for the animals up there, they're edible, is what you're
Um,
saying.
that's interesting. I don't think I've seen a lot of mushrooms nibbled on up there. And you bring up an interesting point. I have a lot of photos of nibbled on and eaten mushrooms from the subalpine and the forests, but I'm not sure I do from the alpine. I don't think I could say I've ever seen one that's been nibbled on. Maybe a puffball, but that's about it. They're all tiny. They may be just one bite and gone too.
Okay, Pete A raised his hand. You got a question, Pete?
Hey, Kathy, thanks for giving us a great talk. I really appreciate you doing this tonight. I was wondering, it was really interesting to hear the mycologists say that they use taste and flavor as like an ID characteristic.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm gonna leave that to the experts. But we hear about the spicy mushrooms and the bitter mushrooms. Like, do you ever see any other flavors like sweet or salty or sour?
Bitter,
Bitter? Yeah.
bitter.
Okay.
Yep, bitter. Um, Mostly we're looking at a certain like genus. I don't
Yeah.
nibble everything,
Got
but
it.
for a russula, then you'd be looking for hot or not. And
Okay.
Lactarius, you'd be looking for hot or not. So you
Uh,
pick your genus and then you pick, is it going to be hot or not? And then you learn certain odors for a certain group. Because a lot of times you smell something and you go, I know what that smells like, but I can't think of it. But
mhm.
if you have a few possibilities, A, B, C, D, then you can kind of go, oh yeah, yeah, it's a cucumber smell. So
Interesting. Okay.
no, so knowing something kind of helps. And you can train your nose to this. Like if you're
Cool.
looking for a hebeloma and it's going to smell like radishes, you can train your nose to go, oh, hebeloma. You just have to do it enough, and hopefully someone's around to go, yeah, you're right. So you can train yourself just like a dog,
Literally. All right. Thanks so much.
literally. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? All right, well, I think that's it. Thanks for coming, Kathy. Thank you so much for
Okay.
your presentation.
You bet. You bet. I enjoy the Colorado group, and I hope I can get down there sometime. So Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, of course. You have a wonderful evening.